Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's Macro Talk, Tuesday, September the 9th, and it's 2025. How's everybody doing? Well, I hope. We are going to be doing something a little different tonight, or we're going to be starting something a little different, and I'll talk to you about that in just a minute. Let me first tell you what's coming up this week. Friday, 2 o'clock. No, Thursday at 2 o'clock. First, we are going to be talking about storytelling, one of my favorite photography topics. And we're going to be talking about how you do it and why you do it, basically. Friday at 2 o'clock, Crystal Art, the first recorded episode. We're going to kick things off with a bang. We're going to be getting a tour of the new database, which is going to be very interesting. I'm also going to talk a little bit about retarder plates, wave plates, as you might know them, when you use them, when you don't, what they do, and what you want to avoid with them. So it's going to be fun. It'll be a busy day. And on Saturday, 10 o'clock in the morning, if you are a Patreon person, which I hope you are or will become, we have Lester Lefkowitz joining us for a masterclass on how to use Lightroom to manage your files. He swears he can find any file in his system within 2 minutes or something. Takes me 2 days, so I'm going to be there and I'll be listening. That is on Saturday from 10 until noon. If you're not a member of Patreon, consider becoming one, please. It's what keeps me in business. And if you go over to www.patreon.com/AlanWallsPhotography, it'll tell you all about it. What a week this has been. If you are patiently waiting for me to get back in touch with you about either a microscope focus block that you have expressed interest in ordering, or a cross-polarizing crystal viewer, if you've contacted me about either of those things and I have not got back to you yet, please continue to be patient a little longer. I have simply not had enough time to take care of that piece of business, but I will, and it won't be before the weekend. That much I can promise you. But I will get back to you. I now have a new list of people that are interested, and I'll be getting back to you soon. Okay. There's a new format that we're going to be trying. I won't go into all the details of why I'm doing it, but it should be fairly obvious. I put a lot of work into these live streams. There's a lot of research goes into them. It sometimes takes me days to put both of them together. And once they're done, they're done. But there is a recording of them, and some people will go back and look at the recording. But oftentimes there's a lot of chit-chat at the beginning while I'm telling you about things, and there's a little bit of chit-chat at the end. And it's not really an attractive way to present the material to most people. So I've decided to do something unusual, and I'm going to take each live stream, each block of content, and I'm going to continue to present it exactly the same way. But I'm going to take it after the fact, and I'm going to cut it up into 3 separate videos, which I will edit into tight videos, so that my content will be delivered in 3 bite-sized chunks that may only be 10 minutes long, but will cover all of the key points that we talked about. And they will be released as standalone videos, which means I may be putting out as many as 6 videos a week, which sounds a bit shocking to me. But that's what we're going to do. So once we get started, I will generally go through to a stopping point at the end, and then I'll deal with questions and what have you after that. So that's the new format. We'll see how it goes. It makes the preparation several times more complicated, because I have to think about things like the transitions between parts. But you don't have to worry about that. What we're talking about today, though, is... Well, the idea wasn't mine. It was given to me by somebody who asked me a question about high dynamic range photography, something that I actually rather enjoy dabbling in, but not in macro that much. And this person, who is very innovative and does a lot of unusual things with his camera, wanted to know where and when is high dynamic range something that you can use in macro photography, and how would you use it, and what are the indications? Well, I want to talk about that today based on that question. I want to answer it as fully as I can. There is a short answer, but I'll tell you I'll tell you that at the end. Otherwise, you wouldn't listen to the rest of it. So, before we even talk about macro, what is high dynamic range? What do we mean when we say that? High dynamic range is simply a way that we can maximize the separation between the brightest parts and the darkest parts of a photograph that still have detail in them. Now, most cameras, like I think Sony's A9 has, correct me if I'm wrong, something like 13 and a half exposure value dynamic range. I think the D850, the D850, my Nikon camera has something like 20. The human eye only has about 24 at a max. And that's still quite a lot of range. But high dynamic range photography spreads that out even further, so that there is detail in the brightest brights and in the darkest darks, way more than we can see, though. So that is what we do when we're trying to take a photograph of something that in nature has so much dynamic range that our camera can't capture it. We know that if we take a picture of it, we're either going to have no detail in the shadows, or we're going to have blown highlights. And what can we do? Well, there's lots of things that traditionally we can do, like using filters on our lenses to lower the range, compress the range. But one of the things that we can do is take a bracket of exposures. Exposure bracketing means you take the same photograph, exactly the same photograph, hopefully, with 3 or more, 5 even, exposure settings. For example, you take a picture at 2 stops below the ideal setting, you take a shot at the ideal setting, and you take a shot at 2 shots above the ideal setting. Then you'd have a bracketed set of 3 photographs that are identical or close to identical, except for their exposures. Then you take that into your editing program, Lightroom, Photoshop. There's many that will do this, and you merge the images together so that the dynamic range that is now presented in the photograph is as wide as the highest and lowest exposures that you would get with the camera. That results in a very, very massive chunk of data, which has something like 32 bits of information in it. It's a very, very impossibly big range of exposure for us to appreciate, and our screens won't even show it. So something else has to happen after we make these high dynamic range photographs, and in that step is the crux of the problem that's going to hit home when we start talking about macro. So that's what HDR is. It's a very simple process. Most cameras, I dare say all new cameras now, have a bracketing capability where you can set up a bracket specifically to take 3 shots or 5 shots, how much separation in the exposure values there are, or how many stops of difference do you want between the shots, and then when you press the shutter button, it will fire all of them at once, minimizing the gap between shots, because clouds have a tendency to move, as do tree limbs and things. And what you don't want when you are taking a group of photographs at different exposures to try to blend them together, what you don't want is things that are moving, because things that are moving will show up in different places in the 3 images or 5 images. This is also going to be one of the real problems in macro photography. So that is the basic idea of high dynamic range photography, and there are reasons why people don't like it. If you've ever tried it yourself, if you've ever looked at high dynamic range images, they have a tendency to be pretty garish and painterly in a bad way, and they can look a bit crunchy as well. That is because most of the time, an HDR image has to be recompressed to show it to you on your screen. So that you'll be able to appreciate all the lovely lights and darks that are in it. It crunches it down using a technique called tone mapping, which happens in your editor, and that is the biggest problem for using this tool in macro. So when do we use it? When would we use it? When could we use it? Well, let's talk first about outdoors, field macro. When would we be in a position to do an exposure stack, a bracket of exposures? Well, if your insect was dead, possibly would be good, or if it wasn't moving in any way. The problem is with macro, you're going to usually be pretty close in, and any movement at all will result in blurriness. So in field macro, it is seldom used, especially not if you're hand holding the camera. A question did come up about how this might integrate into the high speed handheld focus stacking that some of you guys are doing. And absolutely nowhere would it fit in with that, because it requires a fairly long time for each exposure or each set of exposures. And most of the time in field macro, that is just not a luxury we have. It's why when we do focus bracketing, which is similar to exposure bracketing, but the shots can be closer together, oftentimes we'll just fire in high-speed burst mode while we sway back and forth to get our groups of photographs. You can't do that in exposure bracketing, because the last shot, the one that's overexposed, is going to be a long exposure. So you're going to end up getting each shot is going to take you too long to capture any kind of action, and most of the time outside there will be action. So what about using it with something like the Sony A9, the global shutter camera? There is a very interesting piece of technology coming along that I'll talk about a little later on that will make it a possibility that there will be a way that this could be used in certain very special circumstances, and we'll talk about that later. But most of the time, I would say you're never going to use this. There is no really good reason to use it, and most of the time, exposure is not the issue for us. It's getting a crisp, sharp subject because we were able to get the shots before it moved. Exposure is seldom so critical that we are shooting in a high dynamic range setting where it would make any difference. So there is little application for it. So when is HDR valuable? Well, it turns out in very few instances, and most of them are going to be in the studio, when you have either a completely static subject, like a coin that has lots of detail on the surface, some very dark shadows, and where it's catching some specularity from the lighting, and you have a really wide dynamic range that goes beyond your camera's capabilities. There might be a time in that setting when you would use HDR and some kind of focus stacking along with it, which is another of the big problems that I'll talk about in a second. What about shiny beetles, things that do have a lot of specularity and create, a broad spread in exposures? That's a possibility. And probably a better example would be a dragonfly, where you were trying to really showcase the wings. So you were backlighting the wings and then photographing the guy from the front. Well, in that setting, you'd very probably get a kind of silhouette effect where the exposure of the body of the dragonfly would be very dark, whereas the wings would be very bright, being transilluminated. And that could arguably form a situation where getting a spread of exposures could be helpful, and putting them together could be a salvage operation for a photograph. let me say right at the outset that the way we actually control these images that would otherwise be requiring a widened dynamic range is by careful lighting. It's by using different camera angles to get rid of specularity, different lighting angles, I mean, using diffusion, carefully thought out, carefully positioned, by changing the intensity and distance of our lights. There are so many ways that we can do it more effectively than just brute forcing, trying to capture the whole thing the way it is. So I'll come back to that as well. But on rare occasion, you may run into a time when a crystal or a coin or a translucent wing may suggest using HDR would be helpful. I have never, except to teach it, used high dynamic range photography on a macro subject, indoors or outdoors, because I'm not sure I find its value. Some people do though, and you know we'll definitely talk about how to do it, which we'll be doing in the last part of this evening's talk. But we're going to talk towards the end on a practical workflow that will work. If you decide you have a subject that really needs a high dynamic range capture, I will show you how to process it, and I'll explain everything you need to do to get the best picture you can. It'll. I think you'll realize that it's a painful and a protracted procedure to do. Let's talk for a minute about this term that you'll hear over and over again that kind of defines the usefulness of HDR for most people, and that is tone mapping, like we talked about. So the basic problem is this: a true HDR merge in Lightroom, say, is going to produce a 32-bit image that has an enormous dynamic range. And it is way more than any monitor, even an HDR monitor, any print or your eye could discern. It's beyond what we're capable of seeing. So what we need is an 8-bit image to show on the screen. And to get that, or to print it, we have to compress the image back down again. And that's tone mapping. Tone mapping has to basically squeeze all the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows into a limited output range. And there are two main approaches. The one you're probably most familiar with is using global operators. That's what we use when we play around with the tone curve in Lightroom. When we move the curve around in the graph, we're using a global operator, and it applies the whole effect to the image in much the same way that a gamma slider would do. It affects the whole image, and in doing so, you can actually lose detail in certain parts of it because of the way it's affecting the whole thing. Then there are local operators that they adapt the mapping to a region of the picture, and you can enhance local contrast and local detail in different areas of the picture. And that's what gives HDR images an ugly look some of the time. That's what makes them look crunchy or painterly. And you get a lot of exaggerated textures and surreal, weird-looking skies and so on. Now, it's okay in some cases in landscape HDR to have weird-looking skies. Sometimes that is the effect that you're looking for. And it can be okay, I guess. Some people love it. I'm not that crazy about it in landscape, but in macro, that same kind of sledgehammer approach can be just deadly when you have local contrast enhancements and you're trying to do focus stacking and presumably using PMax as one of your algorithms. You're absolutely sunk because you're taking photographs that have had local contrast enhancements, then putting them in a stacker that is going to locally enhance contrast. and what you end up with is some pretty crunchy and awful looking photographs. So that's one of the reasons that I'm not crazy about it in stacking. You can end up with some really ugly stuff. What we need when we're going to be doing macro, if we do decide to do it, to do macro HDR, we need to be much more subtle, and that we'll get into that shortly, so that we can preserve the fine detail in the image without making it look fake, which is hard to do. There is a process that doesn't involve tone mapping, but has the same general result, and that is called exposure fusion. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. It is simply a program. I say simply, it's very complicated. The algorithm in exposure fusion just looks for the best exposed pixels from each bracket and blends them together. It doesn't create a tone map. So you basically get a very natural looking result in this 8 or 16-bit space. Exposure fusion looks a lot better, I think, than HDR, but unfortunately, I don't think any stacking program uses it, and that would be a problem, because that really would be the only practical way, I think, to combine the HDR process with the stacking process and get good results. And even then, it would be subtle. So tone mapping is the enemy of macro photographers. If you ever hear anybody say they want to tone map your photographs, just slap them. Okay, so what can HDR do then with a beetle with broad areas of reflection on the elytra? They're just shiny. They're dark underneath, shiny on the top, any color you want. Now, the purpose for thinking about HDR would be to preserve detail in the shiny bits and to preserve detail in the dark bits underneath. So what could you do? Well, what you can't do is use HDR to deal with the reflections, which is the first thing you're thinking about, or the first thing I would think about is the upper end of the range of tones is in the specular highlights. Well, HDR doesn't do anything about those. It simply puts detail into the highlights, and if your highlight is a mirror-like reflection, then it doesn't contain any surface detail anyway. So bracketing will just give you 3 different versions of the same blown out area, and they won't stack well together because they'll just be specular. So the real approach to that beetle with a shiny elytra is not to worry about trying to capture what you're seeing. You need to change what you're seeing. You need to change what your camera's looking at. And the way you do it is by softening the light source and spreading out the specular highlights, reducing the peak intensity of the light, all of which is done with diffusion. I like to use 2 layers of diffusion, one inside the other, so that you get a double effect and a smoother, more even lighting. That will get rid of most of it. And if it doesn't, you can cross-polarize it and get rid of virtually all of it by using a linear polarizing filter over your lights and then a polarizing filter over your lens, such that when you get them completely out of phase or pointed in different directions by 90 degrees, you'll block all of the reflected light that you're seeing as specular highlights. And it's not that hard to do. It's not that hard to set up, and it's a heck of a lot easier than trying to do HDR exposures on an image like that. Also, you can often get rid of most of the specularity just by moving your lights. It's almost the first thing you should think about is when you have your lights, or your flash for that matter, or continuous light at certain angles, it's going to reflect light off the beetle at certain points. If you move the light, it will reflect the light in a different direction. And there is usually a place to put your light source where it is not reflecting light directly into the camera lens. and causing the blown highlights. So that's the first line solution, is to do those things: diffuse, polarize, change the angle. And if those don't work, and you still have an image that's so high of a dynamic range that you don't think you're going to be able to photograph it without blown highlights, think about it as a salvage method. And yeah, this is damning with faint praise, I would have to say, because maybe there are a couple of super specialized times that you'd want to do it. Say you've been asked to photograph some shiny artifact in a museum, but you're not allowed to touch it or get close to it or change the angle of your camera. That might possibly be worth a try. Don't know. Never been asked to do that. So HDR can sometimes pull detail from broad areas that are either too dark or too light, but it won't fix the real problem here, which is specularity, the bright blown out spots. That you need good lighting control, and you know what I think about lighting. You have to have good lighting control, whatever you're doing. This is not a cure for bad lighting. No. So let's look then at why some of these subjects might work. The dragonfly wing, for example. It is a lovely shot. If you've ever tried to do a backlit insect wing, it can be pretty stunning, but it's very hard to get light on the subject without losing all of the benefit you're getting from the transillumination of the wing. But you want to preserve the detail in the body, and if it's a dark dragonfly, there may be next to none. And you want the backlight to be strong so that all the veins stand out and really look geometric and appealing. So you can, in that setting, possibly just add a second exposure to try to bump up your the range of your dynamic spread. Another example would be crystals or birefringent slides, the kind of thing we're going to be looking at on Friday, that you're using under cross polarity. Sometimes when you've got really vivid bright colors against complete blacks, as you would with total extinction from cross polarization, the highlights can saturate while the dark areas just they lose all their structure and basically disappear. HDR can bring out some of the hidden hues in there. You can actually get a more interesting looking photograph, but it's a lot of trouble to do. Especially if you're having to stack, and it's hardly worth it, in my opinion. There's other things that you can do to help that situation, like allowing some of the light through by using a retarder plate, for example. That will also give you more color. So it can make for some pretty dramatic results. I know that coin photographers, and we're going to be talking more about this in a couple of weeks, coin photographers will occasionally use this when they're using a really strong directional light and a coin with a lot of relief, a lot of hills and valleys. You can do really well with a raking light, like we talked about before, a light that just skims over the surface of the coin. The problem is that light, to be effective at skimming, is often going to give you some specularity on the bumps where light's bouncing back up into the camera. HDR theoretically allows you to get a lot of detail in the relief and in the bright ridges, as well as the dark recesses, all at the same time. So theoretically, a coin with that kind of description would be something that could benefit from this. I was actually going to do a comparison shot for you tonight and show you exactly what I'm talking about with this. But unfortunately, I have an equipment issue and wasn't able to do that. I will explain that later. So with all of that, you can see that there just aren't that many times that you'd want to use it. So there's I'm going to skip through a little bit of this, and we'll deal with that at the end. Let me see. So let's talk about handheld stacking and high-speed photography and the use of this technique. It's useless. It absolutely cannot help at all, even theoretically. The camera is taking 100 frames per second, and a bracket would take 2 or 3 seconds to shoot a single one. So you cannot compress the whole point of using that global shutter is to get as many images collected as you can in a shortest period of time as possible. And doing that is I thought the light flickered there. Doing that can be is all that camera is really made for, is for that kind of speed. Now, interestingly, there is a Sony that has a built-in functionality that doesn't exist on the A9, but may possibly, in some situations, open up the door to a little bit of image manipulation with HDR. And that is a sensor that has dual gain. A dual gain or multi-readout sensor does the following. You know that most sensors will read out the information line by line into their digital converter thing in the camera. The global shutter on the A9 can read it all at once, basically. That's why it's so fast. But the A7, I think since Mark III and beyond, has this dual gain sensor where it actually captures 2 sets of image data from each photo site, a high range and a low range, where it's actually collecting 2 bracketed exposure values. I did not know that. I had not. I'd never actually heard of that. But yeah, you can with one sensor, with one shot, capture all the information you need to merge them together into a high dynamic range image. Now, that takes time. Admittedly, it's only microseconds, but it takes more time than it does to read the data off in a single burst from the global shutter. So it's very interesting, though. I don't know if anybody out there is familiar with dual gain sensors, but having that as an option, I think, would be a bit of a game changer. I think it would certainly open the door to being able to get away with a lot more variability in lighting. I know that this is one of the major problems with this high-speed shooting, is getting diffused light, soft light that's bright enough to support these very, very short, very, very fast shutter speeds. So this might be that if they ever decide to put it in the A9. They didn't, mostly because of the fact that the A9 is built for speed, and the A7 is what most landscape photographers, I think, would reach for over the A9, is because of this type of sensor level trickery. So that is definitely something that I'd like to look into more. I don't know of any other camera that has dual gain sensors. Do any of you? If you do, leave it in the chat. I'd be very interested to know what other cameras might have that. But without that, without dual gain sensor, the use of high dynamic range exposure control in high-speed handheld stacking is not a non-starter. Forget about it. It's never going to do it. They just don't mix. The whole point of the setup that Graham and Klaus are using is speed. The whole point of it is speed, and freezing motion with hundreds of frames in a second is not going to allow you to gain additional exposure information, period. So forget about it. It's not going to happen. So let me see. There was... I'm just checking my notes. It's called dual conversion gain in some cameras, and I thought I read one place that the Sony A9, the original, did have it, but I don't think it does. So, interestingly, the A9 with the global shutter uses a stacked CMOS sensor with integral memory that just speeds it way up. So anyway, it's good to know. Single native conversion gain on the A9. So I've got lots of scientific sounding notes on what this dual gain thing is, but I think we'll leave it there. Suffice to say that the A9 is designed for speed, not dynamic range, though it's got about 13 EV. And that's in practice. I think it measures out at 15 in the A7R and 12 to 13 in the A9. That's the amount of dynamic range it can capture normally. So, yeah, I don't need to belabor this point, do I? It just can't do it. So let's talk briefly about focus stacking and HDR, and why this is about the final straw for me never particularly wanting to do it. It's the issue is that Zerine and no other stacking software that I'm aware of has the capacity to do anything with a range of exposure shots. For example, if you put in an exposure bracketed set of 3 shots for each of your slices in Zerine, it would try to stack all 3 of the exposure values as if they were different images, or taken at different focal planes, because that's what it does. That's what it's looking for. It doesn't have the ability to take those 3 and take the bracketed sets, do the merge, and then stack the outputs. It sounds like a pretty clever idea, but I don't know of any that do that. And certainly the problem becomes much worse with true HDR, where you have these massive files, because you cannot be putting an HDR image through PMax and expecting to get anything out that would be particularly useful to you, because you're going to have so much boosting of the contrast, and it'll be different over different parts of the image. It's not going to be very helpful. So what would be a potential workflow if you are the one person on Earth that decides that, oh, well, I'll go ahead and do a try at the HDR this weekend? What would your workflow be? The question is, do you merge your exposures first, or do you stack first and then merge the outputs? Well, let's start with shooting the images. You would need to set up your camera that each time the shutter was triggered, it would fire a bracketed set. So you'd need quite a long time to go through each set before the camera moved. And if you had a mirrorless camera, I'm not exactly sure how you could set it up to do that. Well, I'm sure there's a way. But you would have to capture all of the images at once, which is going to triple the amount of data that's going in the front end, and it is going to triple the amount of time that it takes. Maybe not actually, because you're shooting them as a batch. But still, you would have to be have all of this data organized in such a way that you could batch process all of the stacks, all of the slices in the stack as separate merge operations. I know that there's a way that you can do that. Probably you'd need to write some kind of a script to do it in your computer, but I'm sure you could. The question is then, do you do that first, or do you do that second? I would say yes, you definitely have to merge the exposures first, and you would want to do everything under identical settings, of course, so that you didn't have the pictures coming out with different exposure values. Now, Zerene will be able to compensate for some wandering of the exposure, but it doesn't per se have anything to smooth the differences of an HDR image. And the smoothing that goes on in Zerene is, of course, related to the depth map and smoothing out the transition zones in there, but not the exposure. So if you were to do that and come up with a reasonable way to be able to merge, it doesn't take an insignificant amount of time to merge 3 photographs, by the way. And when you have to do that, say 100 times for a medium-sized stack, that would be a pain to do. And I'm not exactly sure how much control you would have. HDR outputs are finicky things. When I've done them in the past in landscape photography, sometimes I'll shoot 2 bracketed groups of photographs right one after the other, and after they're merged, they look completely different from each other. Not exactly sure why. So that would be something you'd need to bear in mind. Then, seeing as you can't have Zerene do it, you'd have to do it yourself and then take the outputs and put them in and then stack them. Now, most of the time, you are not going to want to stack these HDR outputs in PMax because of the enhanced contrast and enhanced contrast again that is going to be added by Zerene. So you'd probably want to use DMAP. Well, what's that going to do to your detail? Well, it depends on your subject. If your subject is hairy and has crossing detail, then it probably would make more sense to do something gentler than a high dynamic range merge, and do something that used exposure fusion, so that you could get, and there are programs that do that, and you get a smoother, slightly less broad dynamic range, but it would stack in PMax better. And there are other tricks that you can do to lessen the chances of having damaging boosting contrast. But the idea would be, I think, to avoid that when you had a lot of detail that you were trying to, unless you had a lot of detail you were trying to preserve. If you had a smooth subject like a coin that you had stacked, I think it would be reasonable to just do the DMAP and see what you get. I don't know whether or not you'd have increased problems with artifact from that, because, like I say, I've never been so moved to try it. But that would be an alternative for a smooth subject without a lot of crossing detail. And I don't think that either of these are particularly difficult, whether you stack the exposure series separately and then blend, or do it the other way around. But if you're going to do it the other way around, then you just run the 3 stacks. You have an underexposed stack, a properly exposed stack, and an overexposed stack, and you'll end up with 3 outputs. But again, I shudder to think what the overexposed stack would look like after being stacked in PMax. So probably a good way to do it would be to take the exposure fused set of photographs, or the HDR light set, and stack them in DMAP, and then shoot just a normal exposure, just the middle image of the stack in PMax. Then you could use the DMAP output as your retouching target, and you could use your normal looking stack in PMax from not having been exposure manipulated as your source for the retouching. That is about the only thing that I think might work. is just do your exposure blending prior to the stack in the DMAP, and then use the PMax as a normal exposure for getting detail pixels over to the other photograph. You like the idea of that? We could call that a retouching hybrid. That's what I'm going to call it, because I'm never going to do it unless somebody tells me to. I wonder what Rick thinks about this stuff. Obviously, not a great deal. I think that this is a problem that, or is a solution that is desperately in search of a problem that doesn't really exist, not in macro photography. So, what I would answer the question: what is the role of high dynamic range manipulation of images in macro photography? Very little. Very little. It's an interesting topic to think about, and I've learned a lot about Sony sensors in doing this, but I can't for a minute see a time when it would be a practical addition to my workflow. What do you think? Let's see. Let's see what you guys think. We've got 5 minutes left, so let me go to the. Hang on, Canon's got a dual gain output DGO sensor in the EOS C70 and in the C300 Mark III. That is very clever, Zeno. I didn't know that. Good to know. The Sony is more like using a gradient neutral density filter, not dual gain on a per pixel basis. I think the old Fuji could do it, he says. But this is a very interesting conversation that I've been missing. Let me see, does anybody think that this is a good thing? Don't do it. Joseph, his comment on HDR, don't do it. That was quicker than what I said by an hour. We got more than 5 minutes. My watch is slow. So I'm blurry. I need to be focused. I don't know why that happens, and I'm not going to try to change it in the middle of a stream. I don't know why it's blurry. It's not blurry when I test it at the beginning of the program. Yeah, and I have no idea how you change it, but I will look into that. Sorry about that if I am blurry. All right. What are these guys talking about? This discussion is timely for me. I just got a new monitor that supports HDR. Yeah, I've been seeing that. I would have guessed that my Mac Studio would support HDR, but it doesn't. I was disappointed because, as you might know, Lightroom now has a way that you can process your photographs in HDR. You know, I'm tempted to open it up, but I can't. I closed it to install a program. But if you look at the main editing, what do you call it? It's not. It's the second one. The second work page, you get all the controls, but now there's an HDR button. When you click that, it doubles the width of the histogram, so that you can see in both in the normal dynamic range, or they call it standard dynamic range, and the added dynamic range. You can actually work with the curves and the colors in this extended range, which is because some monitors now are able to support the added spread. Though, Larry, I'm not sure that our eyes can do anything with it. Does it look different to you, the HDR10 screen? I'd be interested to know. Well, thank you, Laura, for reminding folks to give me a like. I appreciate that. Let me see. Pretty easy to transition between the operating systems with OBS on a Mac. I'm not sure what the question was. Sorry about that. I should have read them in order. All right, there's a lot of good discussion here. I hate 123A batteries. They're hard to find, very expensive. Probably the retouching workflow that I talked about at the end there would be the most practical way to use this. I just can't imagine when I'd want to. All right. You haven't had a chance to look at it yet, Larry? Well, it would be interesting to see. I mean, I can't imagine that there'd be much more detail that you could. Much more contrast that you could see, or range of lights and shadows you could see than what I see on this screen here. I mean, it might be my glasses that are the problem, but let me see. I think they don't do it. Excessive tone mapping. Yeah, that's probably for the he's talking about for the screen. Yeah, I don't know how they do it. I really don't. And yeah, I really don't know. I really don't know how to fix this blurry thing either. It does not look blurred to me. Is the picture blurred to anybody else, or is it just Joseph? Joseph, you might need a new prescription for your eyeglasses. Let me see. You know what? I may need to rethink this this whole 3 video thing, or come up with some more granular topics that will lend themselves to splitting up. I can see that this is going to be an absolute bear to put this into 3 videos, and I'll end up just recording 3 separate videos, and that is probably not what I'm looking for in terms of raising the awareness of the station and making better use of the content that I've already produced. But there you go. I use Photomatics, says Mike, for making HDR images. Photomatics. I haven't looked at that in a long time. That's not free, is it? Oh, I know what I wanted to show you. I'm gonna grab a picture while I have a couple of minutes. I don't know if any of you folks have had a chance to meet my friend Mike Canfer. Mike lives in California, so you probably haven't unless you live there too. He sent me this today. What an absolutely lovely gift. 50th anniversary of Dark Side of the Moon. Fantastic. Cannot wait to get into it. But anyway, Mike and I have been good friends for years, and more than 7 years now. And he and I have never met. So I decided to fix that this morning using a program called, what's it called? Nano Banana. I'm serious. It's called Nano Banana. I'm going to show you this picture. It's low resolution, so I'm going to put it right in the middle of the OBS graph. Sorry about that. Here it is. All right. So that's it in the middle. I can't blow it up any because it's so low resolution, but that's Mike and that's me. And Mike thought it was a very, very good representation of him, and I'll accept that looks a little bit like me. But if you have never tried or played around with this new program, the real name is Gemini 2.5 something. I can't remember what the other something was. Gemini 2.5 Flash. It is an absolute pain to install it into Photoshop, but you can, and I did, as a plugin, and it is quite remarkable. To make that picture, I dropped in a headshot of Mike's and a headshot of mine, the one I use on my videos, and I asked Nano Banana to make a photograph, take a photograph of me and Mike sitting at a table, drinking coffee and smiling. That's all I told it, and it produced that picture, which it blows me away. The pictures of Mike and I were headshots from the front. They weren't side-on views. It even got the funny shape of my head right, which I just don't know how that's possible. It is a really, really cool program, and it can apparently do some stunning things. But yeah, if you haven't tried that one out, give it a shot. You have to join GitHub in order to join. Gosh, there's another app you have to get before that one. You have to join all these things and get API keys and load them into Photoshop. But when you do all that, it does work, and it is a lot of fun to play with. I will be using it from time to time, I think, for demonstration purposes and for making photographs that I want to use in my videos. But I will identify them as such, just so as you know, that I'll never try to pass one of these off as real, obviously. But yeah, I just need to figure out a way to do it more obviously than just in the metadata. But I was blown away by this, and I sent it to Mike, who was also impressed. I also took a photograph I had of a rabbit in a field, and I filled the whole field with rabbits. In one prompt, I just said, fill the field with rabbits. And there you go. Hey, presto, it was done. I can't remember what the other one I did was, but it was a good one too. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, I am going to show you this one. Again, it's going to be a small picture, but in the last minute, I found a photograph, which I do not have right here, of a tiger beetle that I had taken. It was one of those pictures, black background, tiger beetle from the top, from the back, a kind of a textbook type photograph. It wasn't walking or doing anything else that a tiger beetle would do. It was just a pin specimen, and it was fairly high resolution. I put it into Nano Banana, and I asked it to give it a natural habitat. Put it in its habitat, and then I said, and add a couple more beetles. This is what I got from it, and again, I'm sorry about the tiny size, but it's a resolution maximum. That's the problem with this. I'm going to try upsizing them, the picture, in the future. I just hadn't had a chance to do it. That's a little better, but it pixelates quite quickly. But let me tell you what this has done. It's taken a static picture of the back of this insect, and it has put it up on legs, the right number of legs. No, it's not the right number of legs, but it's okay. It's close. And it's added the other two in and put them out of focus, which is very clever. And it does actually have them in their believable habitat for a tiger beetle. I don't know if this is exactly what it would look like, but it's very close. That's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. I don't know what these blobs are. I won't press them just now, but yeah, that's it. So if you haven't played around with Nano Banana, get it. You'll love it. It's fascinating and great fun. Okay, guys, it is time for me to take off, and I will see you on Thursday. We're talking about storytelling. And don't forget, Friday, Crystal Art. Saturday, Lester Lefkowitz and Pazoom. And yeah, that's enough. That's enough for 1 week. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And I really do appreciate your support. And let me see, Dark Side of the Moon, London Calling, number 1 and 2. David, I would agree with number 1 there. Didn't much care for London Calling. Okay. All right, guys. Take care. Stay safe and be well. And thank you for coming this evening. And I'm going to think a little bit more about this this change of format, and see what I come up with.